older women. We see this audience as qualitative, not necessarily quantitative, but it also reflects on the fact that these subjects may not be in headlines. I am Lois Herman. I'm coordinator of One Run, the Women's UN Report Network, and we address widows' issues and violence against older women as part of a broad spectrum of women and girls' human rights all over the world. There are at least 258 million widows in this world, and approximately 10% of the world's population, widows of all ages, including child widows, are subjected to human rights violations and discrimination, often denied their basic human rights, marginalized, and even stigmatized. Widows often experience extreme poverty, exclusion, harmful traditional practices, increased war and violence, migration and displacement challenges and diseases, and have greatly increased the number of global widows. But you don't see them in the headlines. You don't see them in the news. And sometimes they are not able to flee and migrate alone. This panel will present specific research and examples of the need to seriously address the specific needs, rights, and justice for widows. And I want to make special note that we have a gentleman here from Human Rights Watch, and they are doing a study on widows. And our program, One Run, has been here at the UN Human Rights Council where we were born. We've been here 13 years, working to get visibility, to get activism and action for widows. And so we continue. And this panel was publicized before, and it will be publicized after. This is a building block. Violence against older women remains invisible in research and in programs to prevent violence against women and girls. The UN CEDAW Committee, in General Recommendation number 27, addressed older women and protection of their human rights. With an aging global population, there are more older women than ever, and yet often poor, with reduced or non-existent pensions, fragmented from family, and with significantly inadequate care needs. All these issues result in their being highly vulnerable to multiple forms of violence, and yet with minimal advocacy and support provisions and programs. The UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Ms. Dubravka Simonovic, the new Special Rapporteur, who will give her first report to the Human Rights Council tomorrow, asked me to give her greetings and her support of this theme that we're addressing on this panel. I just spoke to her, and she sent me an email last night at 11 o'clock saying, I wish I could be there. She has so many obligations, but yet she values the subject of widows' rights and violence against older women. We have with us today a gentleman who has been a primary catalyst for bringing widows' issues to awareness and serious action. Lord Raj Lumba is from the UK House of Lords. He is founder of the Lumba Foundation for Widows and Their Children. He has taken a step forward, the first really powerful foundation to choose to address the human rights, the social justice of widows all over the world.
Thank you, Lois. First of all, I must thank my friend from New York, Heather, who invited me to this seminar, and it's my greatest pleasure to meet Lois and other panelists. I'm grateful to you, Lois, for your kind words, and you might be wondering that why amongst women panelists a man is sitting here. And the simple answer is that I was at the United Nations dinner last year where the executive director of UN Women was present, and in fact we were both honored. And she asked me, she said, Raj, would you please support my campaign, He for She? So that is the answer. I am quite happy to support this campaign because we men have equal responsibility to solve the problems of women and promote their well-being. Today I would like to begin with a story. How much time do I have? The story is, and it's a true story, Sita is a young woman who lives in a slum in Chennai, a bustling metropolis and the capital of India's southern state of Tamil Nadu. She is only 24 and an aged widow. Sita was driven out of her village on the outskirts of the city when her husband, a truck driver, succumbed to the disease. The burdens of bringing up her two children, 4-year-old Lakshmi and 2-year-old Anand, fell solely on her shoulders. Being illiterate, she was forced to work at the only job available to her as a daily wage laborer at one of the construction sites in the rapidly growing city. But Sita had also contracted AIDS from her husband. And when the laborers working with her found out her HIV status, they pressured the contractor to fire her from her job. Sita desperately wanted Lakshmi and Anand to have a better life to go to school so that they would have to suffer a fate similar to hers. But now destitute, unemployed, weak and unwell, Sita was barely able to feed them, let alone provide her basic school education. Ladies and gentlemen, I can recount dozens of heartbreaking stories to you from all around the world about widows like Sita, trapped in situations of hopelessness. Widows suffer not just because they're women, but because they're widows. They are victims of double discrimination. In fact, in one of my debates at the House of Lords, I brought up this point to the attention of the Minister of Defeat, which is equivalent to development agencies in any other country, and they accepted my argument that they suffer double discrimination because they are women and then they are widows. And this has been documented in Hansard, which is a record in the library of House of Lords. Widows are ostracized, exploited, harassed, and victims of multiple forms of violence. In South Asia, due to religious beliefs, widows are often stigmatized and considered evil and inauspicious people, forced to depend upon relatives and a community that ill-treats them. They suffer physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. In Africa, unjust customary laws persist in many communities, even when national laws and constitutions appear to proffer justice and equality. Apart from losing their wealth, widows face degrading treatment and are prevented from earning a living. There is no need to mince words. In more places than not, widowhood means denial of basic human rights. Widows become social outcasts and with their children are the most vulnerable and poorest of the poor amongst us. Dedicating myself to the widow's cause was the result of a personal journey. My mother became a widow at the early age of 37 when my father died of tuberculosis. In 50s, when my father died, there was no cure in India for tuberculosis. So he could not survive. I was only 10 years old at that time. From that moment on, even at the tender age, I saw how my mother's life dramatically changed. Growing up as a widow's son, I witnessed the constant and systematic discrimination and prejudices which my mother faced. There are many examples I could share, but here is one from later on in my life. On the day of my marriage, the Hindu priest who was conducting my marriage asked my mother to move away from the marriage altar because being a widow, she could bring bad luck to the newly wed couple. I was helpless, couldn't say anything, but I was very angry that a mother who gave me birth, a mother who actually educated me, a mother who brought me up, a mother who always wished me well, how could she bring me bad luck? So, when my mother passed away, I decided to set up a charity in her memory, focused on alleviating the plight of poor widows and educating their children. I grew up seeing how difficult it was to be a widow. And I also understood that we were lucky because my father had been a successful businessman, and so there was enough money to educate me and my siblings to allow us to lead productive lives. In fact, my two sisters graduated in 50s when girls were not even going to school in India. I was educated in America by my mother because she could afford it. But all widows are not as fortunate as my mother was. In England, I started my business from a market stall. It's like a flea market in the US. Which grew from market stall to a retail shop, from a retail shop to wholesale to import. And today we have over 500 concession retail outlets in the United Kingdom, office in Hong Kong, China and India, and we employ more than 300 people in our organization. I'm fortunate that my son is running the business, so I can run the charity and do my work at the House of Lords. I'm working here, I attend Parliament every day, and I promote the issues relating to human rights, education, women equality, trafficking, child abuse, all these sort of issues which the United Nations is trying to resolve through Sustainable Development Goals now. In 2005, I realized that widows' problem was not just limited to India alone. In fact, it was worse in African countries. Mainly because in African countries, women were losing their husbands to HIV. The story you heard, that the wives get infected or affected, and as a result of that, they are again lose their status in society. Their wealth is taken away from them. In African countries, the rule is, or the tradition is, that a widow normally marries husband's brother, who inherits the wealth of his brother and looks after the widow and the children. But since now she is a widow of an HIV person, he does not accept her as a wife, even though he takes her back. So she is left as a destitute. It's quite a serious matter. I have spoken this matter personally with Kofi Annan when he was the Secretary General, and with Ban Ki-moon, and they both agree with me that this is something which needs to be addressed, and it's a huge problem that we need to change the mindset of people. We need to educate people. We need to empower widows. And I personally believe that it is empowerment of women and widows which will change the whole scenario. I just saw this leaflet downstairs. What a coincidence, because I have been propagating empowerment for the last 10 years. And here I see this, the power of empowered women, 2016. So I'm glad that this message is becoming public, and widows' issues are also becoming more global. In fact, in 1997, when I set up the charity, I Googled, and you can Google now, there was not a single organization dealing with widows. When we started working, Yoko Ono, I don't know if you know her or not, but the widow of Beaton, she is supporting the Lumba Foundation, and she openly said on the television interview that widowhood has actually changed her life. And it was like a taboo when I became widow. But we should not put this issue under the carpet. We should talk about it. We should bring it to the knowledge of people and, do something about it. Lumba Foundation has published 2 research studies, one in 2010 and one very recently this year. And according to that, there are 259 million widows around the world. In fact, there are 30 million in America alone. And 584 million their children. When you add these 2 figures and the dependent of these widows, the number swells over 1 billion, which is 1/7 of the humanity on this planet. And I'm sure you would all agree with me that it is a huge problem and it needs to be addressed. So I'm really grateful to my colleagues here who have brought this event to life and given me an opportunity to speak. And I will be very happy to receive your support and take this matter forward. And we have widows and their children. Thank you.
Thank you, Larula. Thank you for all that you are doing for widows. And you've told us today that you plan a major event in 2017 to highlight the needs and issues of widows. Every married woman is just one heartbeat away from being a widow. Our next speaker is Heather Abraham Leather. She is president of the Global Fund for Widows. She's co-organizer of this event with women, and she is going to speak on widows research.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you, Lois, for inviting us to co-host this panel, and thank you, Lord Zumba, for honoring us with your attendance and your very emotional rendition on the crisis of widowhood, or as the epidemic of widowhood, as we like to call it. The Global Fund for Widows has been incessantly voicing our belief that the lack of attainment and enjoyment of human rights by widows condemns her and her children to a life entrapped in a vicious cycle of poverty and violence. Indeed, we maintain that there is actually a direct link between widows and poverty. And through our interventions, we've shown that economic empowerment of widows is the key to achieving not only human rights, but also to achieving sustainable development goals. Let's consider the problem of widowhood, and I'll expand a little bit on what Lord Lumba had mentioned. If you think about it, the event of widowhood occurs. The woman's husband dies, he is killed, becomes permanently missing due to political, social, religious unrest, or simply abandons her. Immediately, household income is cut off to the family. Then, she is unable to inherit her rightful estate. This is a critical violation of rights and is invariably due to one of four factors. One, asymmetrical inheritance laws, especially the imbalance of land inheritance rights. Number two, social and cultural barriers, intervention and threats from her husband's next of kin or other members of the community. Number three, her lack of access to justice, a fundamental violation of human rights. Or four, just her lack of knowledge about what her entitlements are under the laws. In continuation of the human rights violations against her, she's subjected to various forms of discrimination and violence. She's evicted from her marital home and rendered shelterless. She's subjected to harmful traditional practices, which include degrading and life-threatening mourning and burial rites, such as forced sex with strangers in order to purge herself of the sin of her husband's death, because she had a part in it. There are times where she becomes part of her husband's estate, as Lord Lumba indicated, and is inherited as chattel through forced marriage to her husband's next of kin. She's subjected to extreme restrictions on mobility, diet, dress, and freedom of association, losing her rightful place and voice in society. In instances of widows as refugees or migrants, internally or internationally displaced by acts of terror, war, or natural disaster, the widow's most basic human right, her very own nationality, is revoked or unrecognized, as is her ability to transfer her nationality to her children. Without an identity, her ability to access any rights under her state or a host country state is totally impaired. In all instances, she's subjected to economic violence. Her limited marketable skills, cultural barriers, and need to care for her young are among a few reasons why she is denied economic opportunity and faces no prospect of work, or at least safe or dignified work. Without an income, she may no longer be able to educate her children, condemning them to an impoverished life at best, but more likely a life wrought in crime and vulnerability to indoctrination of radicalized beliefs. Widows are being forced to marry their young daughters off as child brides for their safety. In the worst cases, widows are forced to sell their children to the vicious underworld of human trafficking. These children become the lost generation with no hope and no opportunity, and hence this vicious cycle of poverty ensues. At the Global Fund for Widows, we believe that offering widows economic opportunity is critical in preventing this vicious cycle from commencing, and we proved it in our interventions. We asked the widows themselves, what does it take to live sustained? And they told us. We trained them in a chosen skill, a skill of their choosing. We trained them in financial literacy, and we trained them in social, entitlement, and rights awareness. We offered them access to a small amount of capital, usually in the form of microloan or in an innovation that we have called micro-social capital, and allowed them to launch their own micro enterprises. Thus far, we've empowered 6,400 widows in 3 countries. Why is this important? Let's take a look at our Egyptian example. In Egypt, 36% of women are either widowed or female heads of household. They're living at or below the poverty line, and 53% of them are under the age of 39, 5 years younger than me, which means they are the mothers of small children. If lucky, they are collecting some sort of pension from the government, amounting to about $1.20 per day, and that is for an average-sized family of 3 or more. Last year and this year, we spent endless hours surveying our programs, and empirical evidence is clear. Before our programs, most widows claimed that they were prevented from inheriting their husbands, even under the protections of the law. Widows felt that they could not move freely without threat of violence. Some had not left their home in over a year. Widows felt that they had no voice. Their thoughts, beliefs, and needs were rendered null and void because there was no man to endorse their beliefs. Widows claimed, when my husband died, I died. Widows were impoverished and could not access food or health care, could not send their children to school, and had no hope because they had no prospect of work. In our post-intervention polling, 78% of the widows achieved an increase in household income, the increase of which was 48%. SDG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8 achieved. 75% of our widows were able to not only pay down debt, but achieve savings. SDG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8 achieved. 95% of widows who participated said that they felt financially independent. SDG 1, 5, and 8 achieved. And 94% of them claimed that they had better social status within their family and community. SDG 11 achieved. As widows' income increased, her exposure to domestic violence decreased. SDG 5. And 93% of widows felt confident to claim their legal rights following our intervention. SDG 10 achieved. So I submit to you the following. Economically empowering widows is our solution to sustainable development, and it's key to reducing violence and ensuring widows' access to human rights. Widows' rights are women's rights, are human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. I believe that what we're looking at today is not only the reality of the serious issues of widows, but also best practices and paths forward for making better lives, more empowerment for widows and their families. Our next speaker is Ursula Barger-Hemmerich. She is going to speak for the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse and about World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, which was yesterday. Thank you, Ursula.
Thank you very much, Lois, for organizing this gathering. Well, I think we talked so much about all the awful things that happen to widows and older women. I think I'm going to try and be positive and see widows and older women as a resource that society needs. It is true that not having a man at your side can be problematic, and it is even in our latitudes. I'm a widow, and I realize that there is discrimination even here. Now, you have to experience this yourself. Now, the first thing I think is to give older women a voice, because this is to empower them and to educate them as you have done, because with education they can claim their rights. And the trouble is that very often it is other people who speak for older women and widows, the medical staff, the nurses, the staff of homes and so on. So unfortunately, we were going to participate, Sylvia, Perry Levine and myself, in a project that was to be organized by a Lausanne University professor. And there we would have consulted and interviewed the older women themselves in their homes, in institutional settings and elsewhere. But unfortunately, the project was not accepted and was not financed by the Swiss Research Organization, which I regretted very much. It would have been an opportunity to really give a voice to the older women themselves. So I think as soon as you can hear their voice, as soon as you teach them to be independent, you empower them, and you fight at the same time violence and neglect. Now, when you think of it, there's a general aging of the population in the whole world, also in the developing countries. This should be considered an achievement, because nobody really wants to die young, so we've got to make the most of it. So we have all the necessary treaties. We have good laws. Most countries have laws. The trouble is implementation, and also at the UN system there is resolutions of comments by the Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. There is CEDAW, which you mentioned, and there's the resolutions of the Human Rights Commission and Council now, and we now have an independent expert on aging, which was also a great achievement. Of course, our aim eventually is to have a convention, because if people say older people's rights are mentioned in all the human rights conventions and documents, this is not true, because why then have they drafted new convention on children, on women, on migrants? So this doesn't stand to any really good arguments. So we have support of South American countries for a convention, and some Africans and some European, but of course European Union, North America are against it, and the European Union has to speak with one voice. But I think we will eventually get there. And the advantage of a convention is that a committee has to be set up, and governments have to present reports, and the committee makes recommendations. So this makes government reflect on what they're doing for older people. So hence the importance of having a convention. So all the treaties we've got, but they have to be implemented. Now we all have to help in educating older women, and I think you can also see that they want to be educated, and in our latitudes we see that the third age university is very successful, and this is what you've been trying to do at a different level, and I think it is very important, because in educating them you can also make them realize that they also have rights. Because even here I find I've been working with a church organization of retired people, and I was surprised how some of the women no older than me, in fact often younger, said, well, they had never been able to say anything. It was always their husbands who decided everything. So this was something unknown to me, but we don't have to go to India and to Africa. It does happen here too. So education really is the key. And what is also important, that widows and older women organize themselves, and I think this is how they can be strong. And it is happened, for instance, there's an enormous amount of widows in Iraq, and I think the World Bank has helped them to get organized, and there are many widows associations now who do extraordinary work in empowering women. Then there's, of course, we have to recognize unpaid work, and this is everywhere. And here in Geneva, quite a lot of work has been made to recognize that household work, bringing up children, it requires management skills. And in fact, a diploma was created here. You know, we have a system of apprenticeships, which is why one of the reasons why in Switzerland there's relatively little unemployment. So you can put a value on women's work, which is not usually the case. Where does the noise come from? Women have been mostly in informal employment, we know that. And there, a few years ago, the Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty did a study on I can't say that, on non-contributory pensions. And many countries have introduced it very successfully. It seems that even very small sums, Brazil has several other countries, even the small sums given to the elderly often are used extremely well, for instance, for the education of girl children. We must think of the importance of grandparents in the countries that suffer from HIV/AIDS, where the parents have died. The grandparents are absolutely essential in bringing up the children. And the role, and also, I think here in our countries also, what is that noise? Is it my, no. Anyway, you don't need that, do you? Oh, okay. It's all right now. In our countries, very often, our generation of women is relatively well off, and they can help their children. Now, the next generation is certainly not going to be so well off because pensions are not going to be what we had. Now, one of the great problems is statistics. There aren't enough. We don't know enough about the situation. And they have to be disaggregated by sex, age, and marital status, which is usually not the case. And I think now there's a new generation coming up of women who have had the knowledge of ICTs, who have had computers, and I think there's a lot of technology for keeping older women at home. So that technology is going to be used, and I think it's going to transform many lives. That's not in the developing countries, but at least here. So there are many possibilities, but statistics are very important, and I think we should be positive and see all the contributions that older women and widows can make to society as a whole. And of course there are so many cultural, like in India, that a widow brings bad luck, she's not allowed this, that and the other. This is very serious, but mentalities have to change, and perhaps they will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ursula. As Ursula said, it's important to give voice to older women and to widows. And so what I'm going to do next is show you a PowerPoint that gives a face to violence against older women and includes widows. For people to believe the abuse that occurs against older women. This is a perfect example. And this abuse can happen within the same family. And there are many different forms of abuse, not just physical, very much mental, economic, withholding medicine, isolation. But this woman gives us a new spirit. Go girl. She is a diver. And what we often ask, who is the older woman? The aging woman, the elderly woman. Sometimes we use the age of 60, but there is no real rule. The UN has stated age 60. But it's a factor that I think is both physical and mental, is who's older? And this lady certainly beats the charts. I will go through these slides a little faster than I planned so that we can allow for at least one statement that also is provided today. But the World Health Organization has been very attentive to issues and needs and the health of older persons. And again, they use the 60 plus. I live in the European Union, and they have become more and more aware of older issues because they are an economic factor, as is the care economy. This is the general recommendation I referred to earlier of the CEDAW Committee on Older Women Protection and their Human Rights. The purpose of the general recommendations are to fill in the gaps that are not covered specifically in the CEDAW Convention. And also, as Ursula said, it's important to have conventions, because if you have resolutions and declarations, these are not enforceable. There is no accountability, and only when there is accountability do countries need and pay attention. A lot of rhetoric, the European Year of Active Aging. But one reason that many immigrants have come to larger European cities is to help take care of the elderly, the disabled, the children, because the care economy did not provide for that. And yet there's tensions when immigrants are the ones who are filling that gap. Family sizes have been reduced, so no longer do we have so many children that they help look after aging parents. There is a taboo, a hidden violence against older women and families. This was a study by the Daphne Project of the EU. In India, they used to have a practice where an older woman became a burden. They couldn't feed her, so they would put her through a ritual where eventually she would die. One ran took this picture. This is in India. Older, poor women. And there's a city called Vrindavan where the old widows go. And now more younger widows too. And they are often desperately poor, a tragedy. And they go into the temple and they sing to get a little bit of rice. Yes, indeed, they are not welcome in many families. They're looked as bad luck, or whatever money they might have had will be taken. These are intersectionalities of the issues of older women and the right to health. No woman's issue stands alone. And so when we look at this list, we realize how many issues of human rights for older women are actually intersectional. This was taken in the country where I live, in Italy. This was the earthquake that happened in L'Aquila. These are older women totally in shock of what happened suddenly in their lives. In Somalia, the older feminine face of war. Or we could look at her in Yemen, or in Iraq, or in Syria. world where there is conflict and war, and the older women are lost trying to survive. Here we are in Iraq. Homeless older women, a completely new dimension. The UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing did her report this year, 2016, on homelessness. No country wants to hear that they have homeless women sleeping on the street or in shelters, but the face of homeless women is increasing. Here's a nomadic woman. There are intersectionalities with culture. And these absolutely are dynamics that affect the lives of older women. And it's hard for older women to move from their nomadic life into settlements in villages or cities where it's all unfamiliar, not part of their history, not part of their memories. I will continue to move through these slides, but glance, if you will, please, at the issues listed here. If anyone wants this PowerPoint in your card, elderly women with disabilities, so many. Aging can bring about physical frailty. Women in prison, yes, yes. We don't see them, but we know they're there. And women get abused in care facilities, as in nursing homes. Look at this picture. This was taken in the UK. In Ghana, older women are sometimes accused of being witches. And so there are camps where they go to have some sense of safety, but they're excluded from family and from the mainstream of life. This is a poem. One often likes to end a presentation with a poem. I am an elderly woman. The lines of my face are etchings of the seasons of my life. I'm not pretty anymore. My hair is gray and my skin saggy in a world fixated on youth and beauty. I am frailer now, more fragile, more often ill. I cannot afford all the medical care I need. I want to tell my children and grandchildren the stories of my life, but they are busy, not so interested in my legacy. I am lonely. My husband, also old, has dementia. I feel isolated, endured, forgotten. What has happened to the respect for elders, to the valuing of life from cradle to grave? Where is social justice to care for old women and provide for their special needs and rights? I am an older woman, but I am very much alive. Hear me, care about me, help me, treasure me. Thank you. We have two statements we will likely not have time to read. I think you can Here's one statement.
Oh yes, this is what Sylvia, sorry.
This is from Sylvia Perret-Levine, and she is chair of the NGO Aging Committee in Geneva, a program that has emerged and progressed to bring attention and activism on older persons. She is also part of the International Longevity Center Global Alliance. She has a statement, and probably in the process of reading this, we will be asked to leave the room. So I just want to thank all of you for coming. That this is a building block event. We need to go from here, and we will, and continue to build, support, activism, advocacy, and action for widows and older women.
So she's really been a good chair of the group. So she talks about World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. This is why I didn't talk about it, which is the 15th of June. We know that, I won't go into it. elder abuse remains largely a taboo subject. We know that's true. Therefore, it's important to see about the abuse of older women. You know, what's the matter with my microphone? Abuse of older women in contrast through their life course of discrimination, oppression, and violence. This is not really accepted yet. Abuse of older women by her partner also constitutes intimate partner violence. This is quite frequent. But both women and older people's service system generally overlook older women's victims of inter-partner violence. Researchers on violence against women too often exclude older women from their target population. A certain limit is set. So surveys such as demographic and health surveys include only women between 15 and 49 of age, which is of course a discrimination in itself. In some societies, older widows are subjected to cruel forms of violence, which we just heard from Lois, and their rights are not respected. So there is a multiplicity of abuse and violence against older people. We know that. And strategies must include the participation of older women, is what I said, that their voice be heard, to provide services adapted to their needs. The role of older women must also be recognized. I'm just reading some parts. And so I think this is the most important thing, recognize women's voices and recognize the taboos that do exist so they can try to away with them.
Bravo, Ursula. Thank you again for coming. We're respecting the time of the panel, but we could talk to you for hours.
Yeah, give you this back. Thank you very much. Give me your card. Can I have your card? Very interesting what you said. Your foundation.
Like 1 hour in this room, but I have a meeting right now. Thank you very much. Your card is registered. I think I have. No. Oh, so you got it. Thank you. I'm still I have to get my PowerPoint.
You're in the middle of it, otherwise, is there any preference?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I have to put my
No, but for the, we should keep the pen there.
From the University of Canada. So I'm here doing research
On older women?
on violence against women.
Okay. Widows in particular?
Just violence against women in general. But I don't think that is going to be really interesting
Data is a problem. They mentioned it. And how do you deal with it? How do you get the data from?
Well, the work we're doing is more about the Human Rights Council as a thing and how it addresses different topics. In my case, how the Human Rights Council addresses violence against women. So the one of the things that we talk about in my report is that it's difficult to address technical using of data, but I myself don't use the data.
Yeah. So we're looking at the data.
Oh, you are.
Oh, would be helpful. Yes, yeah, we're about to publish a report later this year on widows case study. Yeah, I was gonna. Thank you very much. Have your card. I don't have one, but I will write you an email. But it was very Thank you. Thank you very much.
Otherwise, no preference.
hearing this is really something that I look forward to more people.
So far,
Very sweet. Thank you.
Oliver, yes, I'll write you an email.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's one missing, yeah? Oh.
This one is what? That's what I see.